This week on Gravel, tape up your vents, boys, because Andrew McKean is talking about duct tape spiders and his wild and crazy dreams. We're also going to talk about the Farm Bill, get an update on the Conservation Reserve Program, and talk a little bit about the exit of current Secretary of Interior Ryan Zinke, and then a whole long diatribe on the politics of Sportsmen today. And when you hear that thumping in the background, no, that's not a wooden mallet. That's one of the dog's tails on gravel.
Well, you've done it. You've found your way to another episode of On Gravel. It's the bar stool sports of the outdoors. I said it only because there's three legs to this stool. I'm Andrew McKean. We also have Ryan Bronson. We got Eric Dinger. Gents, what are we going to talk about today?
Tape up your vents, boys. Tape up your vents.
So I was just telling these guys, I'm going to say just enough to, indict myself. I had a very alarmingly real dream that I was in deepest Mexico on a booze binge, and the guy I was with said, "Hey, watch out for the asshole spiders around here." And I thought, well, are they just jerks? And he said, no, it's this breed of spiders. And it was actually there was a little political overtone in it. He made it sound like this was the reverse immigration problem. He said, it's a breed of Mexican spider that is starting to just spread out, and now they're being found in California. He said, but the reason they're called asshole spiders is they crawl up your vent, lay their eggs, and when the eggs hatch, they slowly eat you from the inside.
I think we're done here. That was perfect.
I wasn't alarmed because, you would clearly feel their invasion. He said, no. They select for comatose drunks. I looked at my buddy Woody, this is in my dream, who's just pounding beers, and he was clearly alarmed that he was going to be the next victim. So anyway, our host said, there's only one way to inoculate yourself, and he handed us a roll of duct tape. He said, close up your vents, boys.
So if you're tuning in late, Andrew McKean is describing a dream he had. This is not real. This is something that his id or ego, I don't remember those psychological terms, whatever, his subconscious has created this. He's a master storyteller. Now we know where his creativity comes from. It comes to him in a dream.
I thought you were going to say right out his vent.
Well, to control his creativity, he has to tape up his vent, boys.
Hey, inspiration comes in many forms and from many sources.
Never a truer statement than that.
Well, we are right before Christmas. Last episode we talked a little bit about the magic of the Christmas gun. I think today we're going to enlarge it a little bit. We've got a few topics on the docket. I don't know why chuckers worked their way on there, but they did. I'm going to let Bronson kind of lead the way on that one because I think he's got something he wants to say.
Well, I thought you just went on a chucker hunt. Am I wrong?
Well, no, I did.
So
it was more of a long hike.
It was an armed hike, yeah.
Well, that's what a chucker hunt is. Last week we talked about kind of our aspirational species, and I said chuckers, and I think that may have raised people's, what are you talking about? Because in the East, a lot of people think of chuckers as something that you shoot at a game farm, and that's it. And they don't know that there's wild chuckers that you can hunt. So,
well, there's wild chuckers. I don't know that you can hunt them, but I sure tried.
You didn't find any?
We actually there were three parties of probably 4 or 5 guns apiece. We split up in this, I don't know, it's like a 12,000 acre chunk of BLM and a little bit of private land interspersed in the Great Columbia Basin of Washington State. Beautiful country. This high volcanic ridge, just studded with sagebrush that fell over this scarp. It was probably 1,500 feet to the valley below. It was steep, cliffy, ridgy country that chuckers love so much. Ours was the only group that even saw a bird. Dogs got on point halfway down this cliff. I went down there because I've hunted chuckers before and know that's where they live. And this bird flushed so wild and so steeply down the cliff face, I didn't want to was probably out of range, but I didn't want to shoot it and send that dog over after it either. So that's the only bird we saw.
Wow. So my one time hunting chukars, it was 2 years ago, which I know that sounds weird that that's my aspirational species because I've only hunted them once, but uh, we were in Idaho and we'd been hunting valley quail, and the valley quail numbers were crazy. And we got into some pheasants lowland, but we drive out to this mountain in the morning, and you know there were there's quail all over at the base of the mountain, and but the guy said, okay, we're hunting chukars today. They start strapping on their crampons. I didn't have crampons. I flew out there. I didn't have gear, and we climbed this mountain. Well, I needed crampons because by the time I got to the top, I was banged up and dead tired. And the thing about chukars is that I learned that day is that right when you get to the top of the mountain, that's when they fly over the other side down, halfway down the slope, and laugh at you.
Yeah,
But
chuckling.
we got into them, and I killed one, and the other guy that had never hunted chukars killed one, and then they flew up above us, and the locals said, "Hey, do you want to go after them again?" And I asked how would we do that? And this is after we'd gone up and over and around the mountain. They said, "Well, we got to go back to where we started, go up and over the mountain again, and come back down on them just like we did the first time." And I said, "No, let's go hunt quail." And so we did. So I've killed exactly one wild chukar, but it was awesome, and great to eat. I love to eat them. I mean, they're good to eat, but.
I've actually had a couple of hunts that culminated in limits. Some the hard way with just volcanic, nasty, boot shredding climbing, and at least a couple, which was the most gentlemanly way of hunting chukars I've ever experienced. It was at the very bottom of Hell's Canyon, between Idaho and Oregon, and I had jet boated up Hell's Canyon with a friend of mine. We were actually sturgeon and steelhead fishing. And we had shotguns with
there,
us.
By the way.
It is now. This was some time ago. We had our shotguns handy when the chukar came down the slope to get water. We shot him.
So
shot him?
do you think that there is a market if I go to my friends at Primos and say, I think we need to come out with the surround view chukar blind for hunting in Hell's Canyon? Is there a market for that?
There is. Unfortunately, it's going to have to be super lightweight because you're going to have to carry it.
Well, if you haven't seen the surround view blind, I mean, it's a dream to carry, and you can see everywhere. It's a blind without a blind spot. This segment brought to you by Primos.
We got to work on sponsors.
Yeah, because they haven't given us a cent.
But then I've had some just torturous, lung-burning, hand-shredding hunts in the Great Basin of western Utah. Kind of, you can see Nevada from the top. Hell, you can probably see California from the top of some of those ridges. Mm-hmm. And it was in one of the years that chukar populations were high. Chukar populations cycle pretty wildly on about a 10-year frequency. And there were a lot of birds around, but not one of them was very cooperative. And I think it took pretty much light to get a limit. But it was pretty cool to get them. And I was doing a story on ultra lightweight shotguns. And so every time we'd go up the mountain, I'd grab another shotgun. I think I had 4 I was testing. And that kind of broke up the monotony and the dreadful inclines I was dealing with. But you want a shotgun that doesn't weigh much, I'll tell you that.
Question for you about when you're doing testing like that on light shotguns and stuff. For me, having a shotgun that fits is so important. Since you're dealing with shooting borrowed guns all the time, do you feel like that? I mean, is that a problem? Do you miss more than you would otherwise, do you think?
The hero hunter in me says I never miss. But the realist in me is like, hell yeah. Also, I'm a hardcore lefty. And, a lot of guns, if they have a cast at all, is cast on for righties. And so it can be really problematic to shoot some of them. And I'm not the biggest kid in the world either. So, a gun that's got a long length of pull can be hard to shoot too. So yeah, I try to account for that when I'm, evaluating a gun that, one that doesn't fit me very well. It might not be the gun's problem. It might be mine.
Yeah.
I did a very brave gun-related thing this week that I can talk to you guys about because it'll be over before this podcast comes out. So my wife has been shooting a TriStar shotgun. We bought it at an auction a couple years ago, and she really likes it because it's a youth model. It's really light. And we were hunting in Minnesota and pushed this little drainage toward her, and we knew there were birds in there. And sure enough, 3 roosters fly directly over her head in like 3-second intervals. Like the perfect chance to shoot 3 birds. She's never shot a wild pheasant. And her gun jammed on her before she even shot the first time. And so you can imagine, you know, walking all day and then finally having your chance and then your gun jamming. So I actually told her that I took a gun to get it fixed, but I bought her a Benelli manufacturer youth model yesterday. And I cannot wait to give it to her. We're going to take her hunting Saturday, and she thinks she's going to be unsheathing her own gun, and it's going to be a brand new one. That's pretty cool and brave for a guy to give his wife a shotgun.
Were you inspired by our last episode when you talked about how she bought you a shotgun for a wedding gift?
I may have been. Same gun, but it's just a 20 gauge youth model. It's really a slick little gun, actually. So I'm excited for her. And I don't know that I would recommend to other guys that they buy their wives shotguns, but she said she wanted a better shotgun, so she's getting it for Christmas.
Yeah.
And I can't wait. It's going to be pretty fun.
Well, I'm a Benelli snob. I shoot autoloaders mostly. I've got some over and unders too, but I like gas guns. I don't like inertia actions. But the reason that I think that I have such loyalty to Beretta is that for whatever reason, when I pick a Beretta up off the shelf, they almost always fit me perfectly. They mount perfectly. The everything about them. Apparently, I am when those Italians are building a shotgun, they are picturing a chubby Norwegian guy from central Minnesota because it just fits me perfectly. And so my loyalty to the gun probably is more just happenstance that they tend to fit me off the shelf.
What's funny about that is picturing an Italian laborer in a factory somewhere in Italy, imagining a chubby Norwegian in Minnesota. I bet he giggles.
I wasn't thinking the laborer. I was thinking of the engineer. He's got a silk scarf, and he's pensively thinking and drawing on a big oversized notepad, sketching it out, and that's the image that I have.
He probably's got a bottle of Chianti open.
Mm-hmm.
His Maserati is running in the parking lot.
Yep.
And his inspiration is a grainy black and white photo of Bronson up on his little corkboard.
Mm-hmm. Standing over a limit of dead chuckers.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
seems likely.
Don't you think that he wants a translation? That's what we need Google to come out with a device that will translate On Gravel podcasts into Italian so that those Italian gun makers that are inspired by us can listen to On Gravel and really get even more inspiration for the next great shotgun.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the thing. It's called Google Translate. It's the craziest name for something.
Well, I'm going to get us out of this little rut that we're in on Gravel, and I'm going to move us along. A little tow rope action here. We've got a couple of issues of kind of national scale I'd like to talk about a little bit. We've got the imminent departure of our Secretary of the Interior, Ryan Zinke, and we've got some movement finally on a farm bill. Bronson, you're kind of the policy wonk amongst us. What do we need to know about the farm bill?
Well, for me, the big thing is CRP got funded and increased by 3 million acres. So we were at 24 million acres. The cap has been raised to 27 million acres. So hopefully that means that there will be 3 million more acres of grass on the landscape. Now, we're still well short of the upper 30s that we were at in the peak a couple farm bills ago, and funny, that was back in the early 2000s when pheasant populations were at all-time highs in much of the upper Midwest. And if you don't think that those two things are related, you're crazy. I mean, weather certainly is an impact on pheasants, especially on the northern parts of their the fringe northern parts of their range, like in Gleescoo, Montana, and then in North Dakota. But the amount of grass is almost always the limiting factor for pheasant production, and so that I gotta say that the Pheasants Forever took a bold position, and they were fighting for 40 million acres. We were at 24; they were shooting for 40, and I had a lot of folks in the DC bureaucracies and in the lobbying world say that they were crazy, that was pie in the sky. But I honestly think that if they hadn't set such a high goal, that I think we wouldn't be looking at even the small 3 million acre increase that we got. But so we're looking at about $2 billion a year in CRP spending. That's what it costs to pay farmers to idle and put grass on those 27 million acres. So that's good news. And then the other big program that got funded fairly substantially is the EQIP program, Environmental Quality Incentive Program. That's almost as big as CRP every year, and that also is one of those programs that's helping incentivize farmers to do high quality habitat, not just in the upper Midwest where the CRP is kind of focused, but all across the country. Quail and other species are going to benefit from that. So those are some good wins. The funny thing about the Farm Bill, though, is the things that we care about as sportsmen, those conservation things, is completely dwarfed by food stamps and all of the other things that make up the Farm Bill. And I think it's a good reminder that as big a players as sportsmen like to think we are sometimes, we are fighting against some really big stuff. I mean, entitlement programs in the form of food stamps is huge, and then the commodities programs where agribusiness is fighting to try to get more production so that there's more seed, more chemical, more fertilizer being sold and used in the country. Really kind of dwarfs our effort. So I want to commend Pheasants Forever. They've got a small government relations team in DC, but they did some great work. Dave Nomson, Jim Inglis, and Bethany Erb are three champions that the vast majority of sportsmen in the country don't know who they are, and they've never met them, and they probably never will meet them. But those three people were fighting hard for them, along with all of the folks in the conservation community. But I really want to tip my hat to Pheasants Forever on that. That's the big part of the Farm Bill. So hopefully the next 5 years we'll see some more pheasants.
The access program got a little boost too.
It did. So what we used to call open fields, it's got a different name, but I like open fields better. The incentive program to pay for sportsmen's access on private lands got a little boost. And I think a lot of us are aware of the walk-on programs that exist in a lot of different states. The PLOTS program in North Dakota, the CREP program in South Dakota, the block management program in Montana. We've got a program here in Minnesota as well. I think getting access to more private land, it's just one more arrow in the quiver to try to help improve access, and provide public opportunities, and that's a good thing.
Hey, what can you tell us about, is there anything in terms of enhancing the CRP planting mix? You might recall from our discussion of Eric Johansson's farm in South Dakota that's really kind of a next level farm looking toward soil health and sustainability. One of the things that he's really worked on is making sure that CRP is not another monoculture of just brome grass or just a soil holding grass, but that has kind of a lot of wildlife benefits. So some forbs in there, some pollinator species, as well as some nesting cover. Is that part of the new CRP, or is that yet to be defined?
Okay, so now you're getting beyond my depth. I don't know if the enhanced cover types was part of the CRP. Basically, the bill we had to wait till the bill passed before we found out what was in it, kind of. But I don't know. But I will try to find out, and I will get back to you, Mr. McKean.
I'd love to hear about that.
I'll do the research.
So the other big news out of Washington this week was the departure of our Secretary of the Interior, Ryan Zinke, who's been, kind of a lightning rod for, I guess, a lot of dissent on both sides of the aisle. First, I think the conservation community applauded his appointment because it looked like here was somebody, a Westerner with lots of hunting and fishing experience, and somebody who not only was self-described as emulating Teddy Roosevelt, but actually might walk the big stick walk. What's your takeaway on Zinke's legacy?
Well, day one, he reversed a stupid policy that the previous administration implemented on their very last day in office. The ban that they were trying to enact on federal lands on traditional lead ammo and fishing tackle. So they reversed that on his first day in office. So that was something that the hunting and shooting community, that was a priority for them, and also the fishing community. So that was how he started. He had some executive orders, some secretarial orders that would have that required that the agencies in the Department of Interior work to improve access. There's a lot of refuge lands that aren't open for various kinds of hunting for no good reason other than they just haven't been in the past. So he's been working. His order was starting to reverse that, and it'll continue to reverse that because the secretarial order still stands even though he's gone. One of the things that I was most happy to see, it was something that we'd been talking about probably for a decade in the big game conservation world, was coming up with a way for all of the agencies and the states to better cooperate to protect big game winter habitat and migration corridors. And we're seeing some benefits of that already with some of the work that's coming out of places like Wyoming. I think we're starting to recognize how important migration corridors are to antelope and to mule deer, a couple of species that aren't always doing so well. And that was something that I think you were with us at the Western Conservation Hunt Expo in Salt Lake City when he signed that secretarial order at the Mule Deer Foundation big annual meeting. That was awesome. So increased access to refuges and lands. And then he created this hunting and shooting sports conservation council that I think people had some hope would help better represent the interests of sportsmen in the Department of Interior and with the Department of Agriculture. Those are all, that was more of a symbolic thing. We haven't seen a lot directly come out of it. So those were some of the positives. But I think what most of us are seeing in the headlines right now in the Washington Post and others are just all of the scandals that are attached to his name, whether they're related to personal dealings or the withdrawing parts of those national monuments like Bears Ears and things, controversial things. We've got a lot of people already dancing on his grave. There were some real positive things that came out of his administration, but I think there's a lot of frustrations a lot of us had with some of the policies the administration is undertaken with sage grouse and with the waters of the United States. I mean, that's more of an EPA thing, but we've got some big policy things that are not exactly what sportsmen have in mind from a conservation standpoint. So it was a mixed bag, but I think if we expected some savior for the future of hunting to come riding in the Department of Interior, I think that's crazy. It's not possible for any person to be that. It's bigger than that. But hopefully we can find some consensus with the next secretary. You must have some thoughts as well, Andrew. I mean, you You were attributed with a scathing editorial on him one time.
Well, I don't know if it was an editorial. It was a profile. And it wasn't that scathing. I think it was, it was pretty nuanced and balanced. So yeah, I do have some perspectives, and I think the national press has been pretty hard on him, and I think has forgotten a lot of the good things that he did. And I mean, we should really still talk of him in the present tense because his tenure is not over till the end of the year. But
right.
I mean, effectively, he's definitely a lame duck at this point. I think he's a complicated character. I'm actually just doing kind of a piece that looks at his tenure, and actually I started with a look back at James Watt, who was Reagan's Secretary of the Interior. And, he created this little sort of brouhaha when he had the seal of the Department of the Interior changed so that the signature bison that had for 130 some years looked left, switched it so it looked right to comport with his political leanings. And the interesting thing about Watt was he was an unapologetic, just everybody knew he was dyed-in-the-wool conservative and would do whatever. That was his policy direction. And so I think one of the interesting things about Zinke is nobody was really sure what his politics were. And I'm not convinced he has coherent sort of political philosophies. I think he could say with some credibility that he was a friend to Sportsmen and do a few things, but then industry would sort of balk at, I think, a few of the things. If you look at the migration corridors, there could be, depending on how it's implemented, some energy withdrawals along some critical landscapes. Industry isn't always happy to hear that, but then industry would welcome his full-throated endorsement of this energy independence philosophy that says we're going to drill pretty intensively on public land. So I think that in some ways that was his problem. He was either all things to all people or disappointments to all people. And it's a pretty hard road to walk unless you come in like James Watt did and say, hey, here's who I am, and you can pretty much expect the kind of policies that you're going to get. Interestingly, I think Zinke tried to do a few things that really tried to break, I guess, the big bureaucracy and kind of the morass of the Department of the Interior, which has something like 70,000 employees. There's a lot of employees. It's used to be called the Department of Everything because it's just such a hodgepodge of Bureau of Indian Affairs all the way over to National Wildlife Refuges and some of the protectorates in the Pacific Ocean and the atolls. And one of the things that he did I thought was pretty ambitious, and I think it was an idea in search or a solution in search of a problem in some ways, was to decentralize the Department of the Interior and make the regions conform to watershed boundaries instead of state boundaries. And I think one of the best measures of opposition was, Western governors always have some problem with the Department of the Interior. It's an impediment to almost everything that they want to do. Well, even the Western governors hated the idea of the watershed boundaries, partly because it would have broken up, some of the state lines, and you would have had a Department of Interior region crossing, maybe two or three in a single state. But that was kind of I think, it was a little bit of naivete that he brought. And I think that is going to define him to me in some ways. I think he was just a political novice. I don't think he quite knew how to work the halls of power. I don't think he quite knew the priorities to have and swing the weight of the administration behind. And so consequently, I think even though he did some good things for Sportsmen, I think in the final analysis, he's going to be looked at as a disappointment.
One of the things that, as I was listening to you guys, that I think is worth wondering about is, as a pretty dyed-in-the-wool sportsman, as a young, business owner, conservative-leaning, semi-libertarian guy, I'm left to wonder where is a sportsman's interest, on what platform, politically speaking, is a sportsman's interest represented? And I say that because in many ways Zinke had his critics when it came to his policy views on public land. And I think Ryan's right that he did a lot of really pretty good things for sportsmen's access, and I think he was headed in some good directions in that regard. It just, Andrew's saying of, he's a little bit of a political opportunist, or maybe somebody that could be influenced by party leadership to think one way or another. I'd be curious from you guys' perspective. I mean, when I look at the Republican Party platform, I see some really key holes in what I believe to be a conservative platform. And then, on the other side, I don't see much of myself in the other side. And so I'm just be curious, is Zinke a product of a two-party system that's lost people like us?
Well,
or is he something more or less than that?
Well, I've got a couple thoughts in that realm. First of all, remember, his boss is the president. And so ultimately his marching orders aren't the party platform. It's the marching orders of whatever the president says. And I think it's fair to say that traditional Republican platform positions don't necessarily reflect what the president wants to do. The president's got his own ideas. And so when you look at the energy independence platform and things that the president has talked about, you saw the implementation in some of the policies that are coming out of Interior through Zinke. But when you ask the actual, the partisan, which party really is a sportsman's party, I say this as I used to get a paycheck that came from the Republican Party in Minnesota. I've worked for Republican members of the legislature and governors. So my partisanship background is well established and out there. I can't hide from it. What I can tell you is that when I was working at the Minnesota legislature, the Republicans that were in control at that time that I worked for on the committee, this was before we had a legacy amendment where we were getting $100 million of sales tax money to buy habitat. We were making it a high budget priority to be acquiring public lands, wildlife management areas, and state forests in the state of Minnesota. Public lands was important to us at that time because that was part of our pro-sportsman's platform. And at the time, I think everyone would agree under the Pawlenty administration going back from 2002 to 10, the Republican Party in Minnesota, at least, and that's my experience, was the sportsman's party because they were pro-gun, but they were also pro-public lands and pro-public access. I think we've seen a change in the Republican Party's priorities over time, and nationally, certainly this has been the case, where there's been a hostility to some of the public lands and access things in exchange for support of some of the extractive industries like oil and gas, in support of big agribusiness. There's a reason that Republicans do so well in rural America. It's because they're pretty pro agribusiness and the economy that's driven by agriculture in those places. Most of the time that can be consistent with the needs of sportsmen, but sometimes it's not. In the case of Conservation Reserve Program, CRP, there's a lot of agribusiness that doesn't like CRP. They want those acres in production because that means more chemical and more fertilizer and everything else for them to sell. So we've got that problem. But the basic problem with both parties is that the Republicans aren't so good on the environment and not so good on public lands, and Democrats are not so good on guns. And I think over the next couple of years, we're going to really see that as a big issue in the sporting community and in the firearms community. But they're also not so good on hunting issues. Anti-hunters get their voice within the Democrat Party when they get their voice politically. We've seen it in New Jersey with the governor just trying to shut down bear hunting for no good reason other than animal rights activists want to end bear hunting in New Jersey. So we've got that dichotomy. And I think we're in a position where sportsmen don't know which direction to go because guns are important to them and having pro-hunting policies are important to them. But they also care about the environment and they care about conservation and they need public lands. And no one party is willing to give them all of those things. And in fact, a lot of times each party is pretty hostile strongly to the part of what that agenda is. So I don't think there is a pro-sportsman party that exists in America right now. I think you got to pick and choose from both sides, and that made this last election difficult. It's going to make every election difficult. So I guess the question for me going forward is it going to be easier to get Democrats to come back off the ledge on guns and anti-hunting positions, or is it going to be easier to get Republicans to come off the ledge on public lands and conservation in the environment? So that's where I'm at. I don't have the answers yet because I don't know which way it's going to break.
I think that's a pretty good analysis, actually. And I think in looking forward, if you look at kind of those choices, and I think they're pretty well articulated, I think in a lot of ways it's going to be easier to make the case to a fiscal conservative and a Republican that the economic benefit of accessible public lands is in the national interest. I think that's a more cogent argument than trying to talk to a urban liberal Democrat about the value of an armed citizenry and a Second Amendment advocacy, and that we need to hunt grizzly bears in Yellowstone. I wish it wasn't that way, because I think that's probably oversimplified, but I worry a little bit that as we go forward, the public land advocates are really singing a one-note song. That's where they're putting all of their sort of spending their political capital and putting a lot of their sort of outreach emphasis. I think the reality is more complicated than that. I think I come down to, I guess, to bring it back to Zinke, the mandate of the Department of the Interior is to manage federal lands for multiple use. And I think if you look at the wind vane of the politics of that, success or failure is measured by each constituency, like which multiple use is getting the short shrift and which is getting a little bit more attention and priority. As a public land hunter and sportsman, I want to see more sportsman emphasis as the predominant public use or multiple use, because I think it's the lowest impact. I think if you are an energy industry person, you're going to favor more consumptive use among those multiple uses. But I think in terms of public land in general, just having more public land isn't enough. I think we have to take it to that next level of what is the policy implication of that.
So guys, do you know where you can learn to make a banana split?
In Splitsville?
No, in Sunday school. So why did the banana have to go home from Sunday school early?
It peeled out?
It didn't peel well.
What did the right eye say to the left eye?
What did the right eye say to the left eye?
Between you and me, something stinks. Oh, God, I got it wrong. Something smells.
Yeah.
Damn it. Damn it. Yeah, right?
So you guys know otters are not marsupials, right?
Of course.
So my kid thought that otters had a pouch like a kangaroo does. And I had to explain to him that no, they do not have a pouch, that they're a mustelid. They're more like a weasel. And he says, well, where do they keep their money then? And I said, the riverbank. That's just pure gold, guys. So I would like to thank the Boy Scouts of America and Boys Life magazine for providing most of the jokes this week on Gravel. Michael Kinn did not provide any of my material this week.
So I did the dinner table the other day reprise Michael Kinn's pig joke.
Story, the pig story.
the pig story, and
Okay.
it was as painful in real life as it ever has been on the air. I had to lead people to the question that sets up the punchline. Lead them there.
Huh. That's
I would say
weird
by
because
I would say by the whiskers of their chinny chin chin, but that's mixing metaphors.
no, I think pigs are still the metaphor, aren't they?
I think so. Okay.
End this.
Oh wow. Yeah, please. Wow, we've had stronger endings. We've had stronger endings. Just remember, keep your ending strong, and that's going to keep the asshole spiders out of the vent. Until next time, duct tape rules, and you've been on gravel.